Hi, I'm Bridget Price.
And I'm Lauren Kemp.
And this is Entrepreneurs in Progress. Money talks. It's one of the main reasons we are all entrepreneurs. We want to make as much money as possible while controlling our futures. But just like personal finances, business finances are tricky AF. And to our surprise, it doesn't always add up. Today, we'll be discussing finances. There's a lot to the money, so this is probably going to be one part of many segments around finances. So Lauren, I think it's important for our listeners to kind of get an overview of basic finances when it comes to business, kind of a finance 101. I feel like we were forced to kind of take this crash course as we were building our businesses. And I think it's important to kind of outline some of the terms our listeners have heard us reference and will continue to reference through our episodes in the future. So I wanted to just take a dive into some of this language or lingo that a lot of us entrepreneurs use when we're talking about our business and our growth and what actually contributes to the bottom line. So let's start with revenue.
Sure. So revenue is essentially your total sales. So revenue does not factor in your expenses. Revenue does not factor in taxes. And as I've said many times before on our podcast, revenue is not the same as profit, and profit is not the same as what you actually take home at the end of the day. So whenever you hear us talking about the word revenue, it is just total sales. Again, doesn't factor in expenses or taxes. And I think you've talked about this, Bridget, about how since becoming an entrepreneur, you now view revenue in terms of months and not years. Because, you know, when you're in a corporate job, you think of your, money and salaries in terms of, I make this much per year, or even sometimes if you're hourly, it's this much per hour. But we've found that since becoming entrepreneurs, we look at it by this much per month.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that with revenue, because it's going to vary, right? You're not going to have typically a cap at what you will make like you would a salary or any type of job. It really just depends on how you grow month to month. And so that's how we've essentially looked at it. And that month to month or month over month growth will help us determine what we can expect to see towards the end of the year. And it fluctuates. I wish we could say that we know we're going to make this amount of money every single month, and this is what the final outcome will be at the year. But we have highs and lows, it dips, there's slow months, there's peak months, and it just really depends on the state of your business at the time and in what you're doing to scale the growth. So it varies. And so we really have to look at it month to month. I think when you're starting out, you even have to look at it week by week. And it is a moving target for sure.
That's such a good insight because, when you think about salary and in terms of what you're going to make for the year, like that's not going to change. Like, what you're making every 2 weeks, what you're making every month, what you're making for the year because you're on salary. When you're, an entrepreneur to business, it makes so much sense to me. It's like, you can't really you can't always think like that. You don't know what you're actually going to end up with at the end of the year. You can forecast and guess, but that makes sense to me why we look at it in terms of months now.
And I think a lot of companies experienced this last year with the pandemic. They maybe had something forecasted towards the end of the year. And obviously, I think most businesses took a sharp nosedive in the month of April when most states were on lockdown and business just slowed down across the board. Other businesses probably experienced peaks, software-based businesses, delivery businesses, things like that, where they didn't even anticipate this type of growth. So it's hard to really figure out where you're going to shake up at the end of the year. You can plan and you can try to forecast based off of where you are now. But again, it takes that month to month, those numbers to really determine where you're going to end up at. We fell $50,000 short annually that we thought we were going to make last year, which isn't terrible, right? And we made up a lot of ground after the initial lockdown periods. But if you don't go by that month to month, you can possibly set yourself up for disappointment when your revenue comes in at the end of the year.
So let's talk about profit.
Yeah.
So revenue is, total sales. Profit is your sales minus your expenses. And, it's not the same as what you actually take home because that money gets reinvested back into the business most often. But what are your thoughts on, revenue versus profit and just how people mix those up or just don't think about them that often?
Well, I think when you start your own business, you automatically assume that revenue is your money. Like you put in the work to build this revenue. So just like you mentioned earlier with a job or salary, you kind of think I worked for this, so it's mine. It's not the same with business. And I quickly learned that revenue and profit are not the same things. Often when I used to watch Shark Tank 10 years ago, I used to think like, oh my gosh, they made $250,000 on this business in a year. That's amazing. Mm-hmm. And then when they talk about their take home, that's usually when these entrepreneurs got stumped. And quickly now the investors are reconsidering if this is worth investing in because it's like, your profit margins are looking pretty thin. And I'm thinking, this company still made $250,000. Like, why not invest, right? But if they're actually losing money on that, which we've seen in many episodes and just in many businesses, you make $250,000, but it took, $300,000 to earn that. You've technically lost $50,000. And so that was really hard for me to kind of just accept, like, oh crap, I've made all this money, but technically that profit is not reflecting that. And I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, that's the turning point. If you've made a certain amount of money and it's not either in your pockets or in your bank account, you have to kind of reassess the business and how you're going to grow and scale your company. And for a lot of businesses, even with that profit, what that number is at the end of the day, that does not even include take-home pay, especially in the beginning years of a company. It's hard to pay yourself at first because you're trying to make this company work. And that was definitely the case for me and Marcus. We did not pay ourselves for a while. So how did you feel about the reckoning of profit and revenue?
So I felt the reckoning more when we hired our first employee because that's where the majority of our money goes is to HR. It's their salary, their bonus, like health insurance. So like when it was just me and Brian, I didn't really have that reckoning as much because we're fortunate to be in a high margin business. We also, fortunate we did choose specifically to go into this. Partly because of that, we made the analysis and assessment.
Very smart, by the way. Very smart.
So I'm like, wait a second, I'm not going to give all the credit away to just dumb luck. We were intentional.
Right.
But so it wasn't a worry of ours when it was just the two of us, and our expenses were very, very low because we didn't, have office space. We mainly had just software. But when we hired our employee, that was when the reckoning came. And I was looking at our numbers and I was like, we could be taking home more if it was just the two of us because of that added expense. But we know that we're investing in the future. We want to scale and this is the way to do it. So it grows beyond just the two of us because we don't want to run it just the two of us forever. We want to grow and build a business. So that's when profit became more real.
When you see those numbers at the end of the year, you definitely are taking a microscope to those expenses and you're like, I can do this. I can be our bookkeeper. I can go ahead and do everything marketing. I can go ahead and answer the phones. We don't need anybody. Let's put that money back in our pockets, And you can't do it all, right? But when you see all the money that you pay out, Mark and I are like, we got to pick up a broom? What do we got to do? Because all of this money towards these expenses and nothing coming to us. And we're like, what the hell what's going on here? You quickly, you are trying to be the jack of all trades once you see those numbers. But then down to earth, like you said, you're investing in the future. You're investing in the business. And, that is something you have to keep top of mind. But yes, when you see those expenses, man, you're trying to figure out any which way to restructure a budget or cut some things, streamline things, be a lean, mean operating machine. And it's tough to see everyone else kind of, in a way, benefiting off of your hard work and your fruits of your labor initially, even though that's what it takes. But yeah, I think that a lot of companies come to that realization when they see those expenses just add up, right?
Yeah. And Brian and I were talking about this too, because he in the very beginning, like, was very much even now, he's very much a DIYer. Like, he wants to do everything himself. He is learning to delegate more and let go. But one thing we talk about is how well you and Marcus outsource a lot of help. And it's just a very different, approach. And I was wondering, how do you guys think about, outsourcing those kind of skills? Because obviously it's taking away from your profit, but
right.
What's the thinking?
So I definitely was like Brian. I still am a little bit. I love to DIY. Like, I always feel like I'm the best at it anyways. I can do customer service. I can figure out social media. I can do marketing. I can do whatever it takes, right? But obviously you have to start assessing or evaluating your time and where you should be delegating your personal time, your work time to this. This business has definitely taught me the art of delegation, and Marcus is very much like, I'm going to pay whatever it costs to get this off of my plate because I have higher level things I need to figure out. And that has helped me. When you find the right people, a weight is lifted off your shoulders. We have 2 admin staff that are great at what they do. It took a while to even get there, to get to this point. They're smart, they're capable, and I can trust them, and we empower them, right? So I believe it's important to release any ego you have around your work and trust the people that you hire.
I think that's a big realization for a lot of new entrepreneurs, is just how valuable your time is. And like, you want to be spending it very wisely, working on high level stuff. Like, if there is a weakness in your, skill set, you want to outsource that to someone who knows how to do it better. I know it's hard in the beginning. If you're bootstrapping, you can't like hire people right away. And so you do have to do it yourself a lot. But yeah, I think that that's really key, is just understanding, how valuable your time is and what you really should be spending it on.
You will have to bootstrap and you will have to be a DIYer in the beginning stages of your business. It's important not to get attached to that, right? Because sometimes I think business owners grab onto that idea of, I'm the owner.
Yeah, gotten off on a fun tangent. Now we're going to bring it back to Finance 101, or definitions. So as a quick review, we talked about revenue, which is essentially your total sales, doesn't factor in expenses or taxes. Now we talked about profit, which is your sales, your revenue, minus your expenses. And then now we're starting to get into margin. And, when I talk about margin, we're usually thinking about it in gross margin, which is, the amount of money you make after the cost of production. So there's actually, as I was doing my research, because I was like, I need to like get my definition straight before I was like, I'm not even sure how I can explain this. I know it when I see it.
Yes.
But so I learned there are actually like 4 different kinds of margins. There's, gross margin, which is, cost after production, which is what I think most people think about when people are generally talking about margin. You see some sunglasses and then you see how much it costs, and then you learn how much it actually costs to make, and you're like, what? That much for that like piece of plastic?
Right. Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
And then there's, operating margin. So that takes it one step further, where it's your margin after cost of production and expenses. It goes even further to pre-tax margin. So that's when you start to, deal with, depreciating assets, like, just like the kind of last few tweaks before you like submit your taxes. And then at the very end is net profit. So net profit is like after your cost of production, after your operating expenses, after all of it, what do you actually have left? And even then, like that often gets reinvested back into the business and doesn't come home to your pocket. And so Brian and I are talking, it's funny because I live in net profit and Brian lives in like pre-tax margin. I was like, no.
So
like
funny.
what do we actually take home after taxes? And Brian's like, the rest of the world lives in pre-tax, Lauren. And I was like, not me.
Right. I'm not playing that game. Yeah. Hilarious.
But when we're talking about margin, most people think, oh, like it costs you this much to make that thing, but you're charging me like, way more. And I think the majority of people don't factor in like expertise, and they obviously don't factor in like operating expenses or taxes or some of the other ones when you get further down the list of the different types of margin. And I see that a lot with like consultants or doctors or lawyers. People see like, oh my God, I'm paying you like 300 or 400 or however many dollars per hour for this 1 hour. And it's like, no, you're not paying me for 1 hour. You're paying me for 10 years of studying or experience and my time that got me to like all that learning that I acquired. Like, you're not paying me for 1 hour. You're paying me for like decades of work.
Right. Yeah, they don't factor in that expertise or that skill set, or that your quality in this kind of saturated market space. And so a lot of people will see that and gawk at the price and try to take their business elsewhere. And in this case, you definitely get what you pay for. That's just facts. And so I think a lot of people forget about that, and they are so stuck on the price because we're this just driven by making sure we get value out of whatever we purchase, which is why Costco is so popular. But yeah, I think a lot of people don't factor in everything that goes into trying to make this dollar and the time it took there. These doctors, these lawyers, they have school they have to pay for. They still have loans that they took out. So I don't expect patrons to really get that. It's more or less up to the person selling the service or the product to just stay true to their value and their worth and not take anything less, which is very hard in the beginning. Yes.
Yeah, I think pricing is going to be a topic we touch upon eventually in this podcast. But yeah, I think that, so I don't know if you get this feeling too, but I get the feeling like that people think margin is such a dirty word and like has this negative connotation to it. Have you found that in your experience?
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't want to talk about margins, which is why that's one of the first things investors ask. Like, what are your operating margins? Like, what's going on? Because it's great if you've sold $500,000 worth of stuff, but like if you're only making $7 or whatever on this product, I don't think that's an attractive margin, and I'm worried that anything could change where that margin is going to become even less. And I think that's something that most entrepreneurs have to keep in mind. That's why you want a healthy margin. If you have something volatile come into your situation and it rocks the boat, your margins are going to suffer as a result of that. Scaling, we see that scaling businesses, your margins usually are the first thing that gets attacked because you're trying to grow at rapid pace, and in order to do that, you have to introduce new expenses to make that growth possible and to sustain that growth. And if you don't know your numbers, I mean, you'll never see any money in your pockets. You're always going to feel like you're, working, and this business is just a sunken cost. And I don't think any entrepreneur wants to feel that way.
Yeah. And I think too, when we're talking about, like why people feel like margin is such a dirty word from like the outside. So I'm talking about like people who aren't entrepreneurs. I think it's because you feel taken advantage of, because it's like, oh, if it costs you only $10 to make that, but you're charging me, $100 to buy it, like you feel like you're getting ripped off, almost,
right.
But you're not factoring in, all these other different aspects. And I think obviously there are cases where it is unethical to have like crazy markups. Like I think about Pharma Bro jacking up the price of, anti-parasitic drugs. I read it was like from $13.50 a pill to $750 a pill. And it's like, okay, that's some bullshit right there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think it's like, when it's things people need, that's different. If there's a monopoly, that's different. I think when we're talking about margin for like the majority of businesses, it's, like people will only buy from you if they think it's worth it. Like you're providing some value, you're putting a price to that value. People can choose whether or not to buy from you. So if your prices are so high and you have great margins, but no one wants to buy from you because they think you've overvalued whatever you're providing, like people aren't your business isn't going to do well. Like people aren't going to pay you.
No,
and
they're not.
I think people don't understand that whole transaction part of that. Like you're pay, like if you're willing to pay for this service, like you're not getting taken advantage of because clearly you think that the value of my service or product is, equal to or greater than what you're paying me for,
Yeah, that is the importance of having a diverse marketplace. You're able, the consumer is able to kind of go out and compare and see what's kind of on the high end, low end, and what's in the middle, and then choose what's comfortable for them. If you know that a pill costs $13.50 and then they've hijacked it to $7.50 because, other companies have had troubles with sourcing it, or there's some production issue across the board, but this company somehow magically has like all these reserves or whatever, and they're gouging consumers, that is unethical, right? And then I wouldn't want to deal with that company at all, and they would definitely damage your reputation for sure.
Yeah. So it's just so interesting because like I've even talked to people who think margin is a dirty word, but then they want to like start their own business, and I'm like, oh.
No, you have to become comfortable with all of this language. It's very important, and I think obviously, if we haven't said this already, getting to your profit or net profit, the only way to do that is knowing your margins and understanding your margins. You cannot necessarily, you might make money, but you won't understand how you got there. And if something happens in your business and you see your profit kind of disintegrating, it's because you probably are unaware of your margins and what's happening to them. So
Ooh, I want to share something that I learned from Cozy Cactus actually. So I didn't know this, but like whatever your retail price is, at least for the skincare body balm industry that I was in, I don't know if this applies to like restaurants or food or like whatever thing, but in general I learned that the rule is, if you want to sell wholesale, it is half of what your retail price is. Like,
oh
yeah. And so that obviously factored into how we set the price for our bombs, because it's like, okay, well, it costs us this much money to make it, and then you need to, have some profit on top of that to be able to keep, the business going and to pay for those other things like operating expenses and taxes. And then on top of that, like if you want to do wholesale, you have to have your retail price and still have we had barely nothing margins. Like we had to make it so that we weren't losing money, or in the beginning, sometimes we did actually sell wholesale where we had a little bit of a loss just to try and get our product out. But
sure,
in general, I was like, oh, now I kind of understand why things are so marked up in stores or, at a bar when you buy that overpriced drink and you're like, why the fuck does this cost me so much? It's like, oh, okay. I was like, oh shit. I had no idea. Wholesale just slices your margin so much.
They do. Absolutely. I mean, I remember learning that a glass of wine at a bar or restaurant, technically that whatever you pay for that glass is how much the bottle actually costs to make or produce. Or how much you could pay for it in a store. And I thought, ooh, I don't know if I can buy wine anymore knowing that I'm paying 4 times the amount for a glass, right? But you're right, that wholesale cuts into margins like crazy. And it does make sense why things are of certain value. I mean, I really feel for restaurant businesses. Their margins are so super thin. It's crazy. Yeah. And they have to deal with a lot of other extenuating factors like spoilage and keeping the right amount of inventory. It's very hard.
Yeah. And I was talking with my friend about this last night when we were at the bar. It's like, okay, we know we're paying a lot for this drink, but it's like, all right, we understand there's the wholesale, part of it. And you're paying for the atmosphere. You're paying for them to open that drink for you.
Yeah, you're paying for the service, you're paying for the building to sit under, or sit
exactly.
in.
Like it's not just the glass of wine or the beer. It's like, okay, like what I'm actually paying for is a lot of other things, like somewhere to go that's not at home.
Yeah, absolutely. It would be nice if consumers were like more aware of that or considerate, but
But like people just don't you don't think about it unless you're critically actually putting some deeper thought into it,
Yeah, for sure.
It's like when we talk about, revenue, people just think about revenue. They don't think about the other expenses that come with running a business. Same with profit. People think, oh, you're just making all this money, but they don't think about the fact that you might be reinvesting it back in the business, that it might be in savings, that you actually don't really feel that money, or profit can be manipulated. We talked about the example with Salesforce, where they're growing like crazy, and you're able to manipulate and show that you don't have any profit because you're just spending so much on acquiring other businesses or hiring people or doing all sorts of things. So even profit can be muddled number.
That's why people need to be like you, Lauren, and focus on that net profit.
Exactly. Yeah, Brian. I live in the net profit. I don't want to worry about pre-tax. Tell me how much I'm actually taking back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I could see Brian's face, oh, Lauren.
Yeah, he's going to listen.
Everyone lives in pre-tax. I can totally see it.
So the last, definition or thing, part of Finance 101 that we want to talk about is bootstrapping. So I know we use that word a lot. And so for those of you who are not familiar, bootstrapping is the same thing as self-funded. This means you have no investors, you are putting in your own money, and that is essentially what, Bridget and Marcus and Brian and I have been doing for all of our businesses. We don't have really any experience raising money.
Zero.
It's just been our own money.
Well, it's funny. I've had so many people ask if we have investors. I'm like, for a cleaning business? I'm like, no investors at all. We are self-funded.
So why did you choose to bootstrap?
I mean, we didn't know any other way. We didn't know any other way. I mean, even when back in the day when we were looking at other businesses and ideas, we looked into getting a loan from a bank, and it's under regular circumstances, that is really hard to do. They want proof of revenue. They want to know that this business is working. I'm like, but I'm coming to you to start this business.
Start the business. Oh my God. That's starting an entry-level job where they're this is entry-level. This should be your first job, but we want you to have 5 years of experience. And I'm just what?
Yeah. And I'm getting over the paperwork. Wait a second. You want me to be in operation for 3 years and then have, gross profit and wait, then I won't need a loan. I don't understand. I don't get it. And it was very difficult, a lot of red tape. And I've read about a number of people who've been able to navigate banking and capital and accessing capital with nothing and just an idea. And, you kind of pull back the layers. Someone knows somebody, a family friend works at the bank, there's someone to vouch for them. And we were not in that position. And so we honestly did not have any other choice but to be self-funded. Thankfully, with this cleaning business, Marcus was able to get the initial costs, and they were under $10,000. And so he felt we could do this, both of us working, having income, extra resources. That's essentially what we did. So it would have been nice to use someone else's money. There's also that pressure to deliver too when you do have investors or have a loan that's gaining interest and things like that. So I actually do recommend bootstrapping whenever possible. And, trying to talk to people who have had investors or work with investment groups and determining kind of the do's and don'ts if you want to go that route for a bigger idea. But I definitely recommend bootstrapping.
Yeah, one of the reasons that Brian, wanted to bootstrap on top of him just being a DIY kind of guy was that he likes having that control, and he's saying he wanted to make sure the business was viable, and he wanted to own that equity. He wasn't ready to give up equity or control right away or have other influences on his decisions at the beginning,
Right.
And it's something that, he would be open to later. Like we talked about with Rotiv, like would we be open to investors like later down the road? And it's possible, but for him, it was making sure that the business was working. Like
right.
He didn't want to get a bunch of capital where he didn't know if he could use it effectively, and make sure that it's easier to spend other people's money, of course, than your own. You sure don't feel it like you do when it's
right.
your own.
Right.
But you still want to make sure you're spending it wisely, and that what you're spending it on, you can use it to actually help the business grow. So that was, some of the concerns for Brian when he was, thinking about bootstrapping or investors.
Yeah.
One thing you didn't mention when we were talking about investors is family and friends investing in your business. Because I think that's also how, back to Salesforce, of course, I know so much there. I believe Mark Benioff started out by asking, friends and family to get some of the, initial investment money, because people didn't want to invest in Salesforce originally. He had to figure it out and get it from other people. And
wow.
Is that something that you would ever consider?
At first, listen, I got that deep pause for a second. At first, the answer to that be hell no. But now there are selective family members who are also entrepreneurs who have done well for themselves, who we have considered and even talked about pursuing ventures with. So now, yes. Back in the day, hell no. But even with some friends, I think so too, because I think we're older, we're more, a number of us are more established, and I don't think you should ever underestimate the value of someone willing to help you out or invest in you. I know some people have this thing where they want to kind of go at it themselves or do it by themselves, and then can say at the end of the day, I am self-made. But I am all for, if someone wants to step in and help and contribute, listen to them, see what they can offer, see if it's worth it. And then if it all works out, take it. I hope to one day be in a position where I can do the same, and we know how hard it is. We are so beyond the idea of I figured it out myself, so you have to do the same. I'm all for, I figured it out. I'm going to pass the torch. I'm going to pass the rope. I'm going to help you as well, versus having people go through this muddled experience, because it's very, very difficult. I didn't know that about Salesforce. I think that's very interesting.
Yeah. And, I was the same mindset as you, where, I was like, I don't want to mix family or friends, with money. And I think I would still be very hesitant, because I've seen how money has ruined some relationships within my family. So I definitely am a lot more hesitant to ask either of our parents, for investment money. I feel like I could, but I don't want to yet, or maybe even ever. But I know that it does work out sometimes. So I actually kind of like the story. So one of my friends actually had asked my parents, this is many years ago, for some money for, their business. And they gave him the money. I don't exactly remember how much it was, but I think it was somewhere in the thousands of dollars. And, this person worked really hard, worked on the business, and then eventually ended up leaving the business. And they actually paid back my parents, the initial investment that they had been given, which I was just like, wow, that's really awesome. That's really cool. I respect them so much for that. And I'm sure my parents did too, obviously. Yeah. Because, when you're investing your money, you usually don't expect to, most of the time you don't expect to see it back.
Sure.
You're taking that risk, and you're willing to, accept a certain amount of loss.
Right.
So I think that because of that example, I do feel like things can go well if you have that mutual respect, and, it doesn't always end horribly if you're working or investing with, family or friends and it doesn't work out.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great story. And it might make your parents more likely to help someone else in the future. They had a positive experience. maybe they didn't make money, but at least they got their initial investment back.
Yeah.
And I think that's super important. And clearly, I think your parents saw something in this friend, right, that proved to be right. This person operated with integrity. The business he or she left, but still paid your parents back. And I think that's awesome. And that's all you can really ask, because you're right. As an investor, you're taking a risk. You're gambling, and you may or may not see your money back. You may not see a return. But it's nice to know that it wasn't just kind of like, I've invested in this money, this person's left, and then you never see them or hear from them ever again.
Yeah.
So that's awesome.
Yeah.
I've heard of other stories that didn't go so well, but, and that's within family. So, not my family or Marx's family, but friends of friends that I know whose family has invested in them and it didn't work out too well. And it did create kind of that, tension.
Oh yeah. I've heard that with other, families as well. It's tough.
Well, I think there's boundaries, right? I think depending on the business, families, if they invest, they now feel like they have some ownership, and now they want to see things carried out a specific way. And there's a lot of toe stepping and.
Yeah. But I also get that, if you're investing in a business and you do have ownership, if you're given equity and you do get some more of a say, which is also why Brian didn't want to do that initially, is because you do give up some of your say, even if you still have the majority of say, like even if you're only giving up like 5%,
Sure.
they still have some ownership. And, I don't know. It's the whole investor, landscape. That's something that I don't know as much about or how that goes. So, but I imagine it's a lot more complex than just doing it yourself. And you don't have to report to anybody but you.
Yeah, absolutely. It would be interesting to talk to a couple of people who have investors and what their major decisions look like and, what they're up against.
Yeah.
Saving for a future episode. So now that we've gotten through kind of this finance 101 lesson, I mean, I guess we can dive into, piggybacking off of bootstrapping, kind of what these startup costs look like when you're venturing into a business. And they can definitely vary. I think when we go through our idea high, we don't always consider, or we forget to factor in what it takes to start it up. Not just time, but how much does it actually cost? So it's a little scary. Another reckoning of sorts.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's so different for product-based businesses versus service-based businesses. Because what at least Brian and I found in our experience is that with service-based businesses, it's a lot easier to make that transition because you're able to do services part-time depending on what you provide. Like, I'm not sure if it's quite the same with your cleaning business, but I felt like with Rotiv, Brian was able to ramp up and he didn't have to be like a full jump from nothing to everything ready and having something. And there's also just less costs when you're a service-based business starting up, depending. With services, we found it's easier to invest less, money up front than it was for Cozy Cactus with our product-based business, because you have to have inventory, you have to create the product and basically pay for that cost of, production before you have sales.
You have two very distinctive businesses. And I think it is amazing that you can compare the two. So in relation to startup costs, what were the differences with Cozy Cactus and with Rotiv? I know you're right. They're very different in services. You can start part-time. You can kind of grow at your own pace, rather. And with product-based businesses, you have to have this inventory. You kind of have to invest a lot up front to, even with the way Cozy Cactus is formed, you have to do a lot of testing. You have to get the right ingredients. You have to get the right mixture. You have to get the right packaging. There's so many things that go into this. So knowing what you know now, I mean, what did that look like for Cozy Cactus and Rotiv? And I guess, if anything, would you go back into a product-based business or evolve your current product-based business?
Good questions. So with Cozy Cactus, like we did, invest a few $1,000s up front because we had to go through that R&D process and, we had to buy different, containers to figure out which container we were going to use and figure out where we were going to get our ingredients. And we went through like 12 or 13, iterations before we found the quote unquote recipe for our balm. And like getting the website up and ready. Like there was so much time and effort invested up front for, our product-based business. So like for Rotiv, so I talked to Brian, we did have to invest in his mind a couple grand up front because in his mind for Rotiv to really work, he needed to have the Salesforce certifications. And that's like $800 of testing there because he had to get 4 different certifications.
Wow.
In order to become a Salesforce partner. And then to be a partner, you pay like a $1,000 membership fee, for the year. I think they dropped it down to $500 because of COVID for this year, which was nice. But so I guess even for our services businesses, there was a couple grand invested up front. And for, Cozy Cactus, I think we were up to like, I don't know, maybe 5-6 grand. We were at 7 grand at one point where we had, sunk in that much money. And by this time we're going and we're seeing if it's working out or not. And then I think we, made some profit last year. So we're kind of back in that $3,000 to $5,000 investment range, which I feel, better about. Like I told myself I never wanted to like get past that $10,000 mark. Like I was like, well, if we've invested $10,000 in this product, then like we're done. Like if we're not getting anything from this, like I'm done. And we didn't get there, but it doesn't even factor in all the, time and years of work that were put into it. This is just like the money side of investment. But I would, consider a product-based business again and even go back to Cozy Cactus and either change things or I don't know. I'm not gonna completely give up on product-based businesses because those can be very, lucrative too.
You can keep selling it and selling it and selling it and selling it. And all you'd have to worry about is making sure it can be produced. And
you don't have to usually worry about as much, like, I guess, hiring. Like you can do a lot with just like, Brian and I could do a lot with just the two of us. Like we don't need a storefront. We don't, need to have employees running the storefront. Like we could get a lot done with a product-based business, like with just the two of us. And, when we're thinking about products for like Rotiv, we're thinking about like, oh, like we'll make a video course and then it's like you make that once, but you can sell it multiple times. So I do like that part about product-based businesses, but I do think it is a lot harder to do a product-based business versus a services-based business where you like built up relationships. I remember talking to my hairdresser. I was like, how did you go from working at a salon to your own business? And she said, I had customers who followed me. It's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like with, a hairstylist or a therapist, like you're going to follow the person that you like. And I feel like services are that way because you build that relationship, that trust, and they're like, I'm buying you. I'm not buying the company necessarily.
Right. No, that's
Sometimes.
Absolutely very valid. And, I've considered a product-based business as long as I can do drop shipping. Because in terms of like evaluating inventory costs and things like that, I wonder is something, because Cozy Cactus is a unique product offering with it being CBD balm oil. Is that something that can be drop shipped, or is that something where you'd have to store various amounts of inventory?
I think it can be. I think there are definitely services out there that offer it. We do not. Like you need to get to a certain volume. So we never got to the volume where I wanted to outsource production and drop shipping, and you need that volume to keep your inventory turning so you're not storing up balms for a long time. So it's very complex. It's like when you're talking about the restaurant business, like, at least they have a shelf life of a couple years, which is nice. Like, it's not like food that's going to go bad in 2 weeks. But yeah, like it's a different beast, I like our service business right now with Rotiv, and we're hopefully going to turn that into some kind of hybrid. But I would love to go back one day and, do Cozy Cactus. Like I would do a product-based business, but knowing what I know now, like I would definitely want to start with like more funds, more capital.
Well, that's a great point. So with startup costs, obviously we're thinking about bootstrapping versus investors. If you do another product-based business, would you prefer to have investors this time around?
I would still want to get it up and going and making sure that, like Brian said, like if we get capital, we know what we're doing with it and we're able to use it effectively. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's an unknown. And I think that's a lot of what happens, with figuring out your next move and how to go back to a business or start a new one. You even knowing what you know now, sometimes you still wouldn't do anything different. Like I would want to fund it myself. I don't want to have to deal with investors or someone, inputting their say in how I operate or run my company. So
yeah, I think I would have
totally
better
agree.
expectations going into it if I were to go back into, a product-based business. It's like, okay, I know better what to expect. And I don't know, product-based businesses are scarier for me in some ways because it takes even longer to get that ROI. Like with services-based businesses, you can figure out if it's working or not much faster. Whereas with, the product, you put in a lot of time up front and you don't know if it's going to pay off until you've sunk in, a lot of more money and time.
Yeah, that is one of my goals. I want a product. I want to develop a product. I want to sell it. And ideally, I want it to be a mainstay. I don't know what that product is just yet, but I definitely want to introduce some type of product to the world.
Yeah.
Have my name on it and then make my millions of dollars. But yeah, I'll keep you updated on what I come up with. I'm always churning the wheel, so we'll see.
How much money did you guys invest in Made Easy? And even, you've talked about, previous ventures where you've invested money. So like how much money have you been willing to invest in? How much money have you invested and potentially lost if you're willing to share that information? And like, how do you guys think about that?
My business, College Genie, that was a service-based business. So initially I invested probably like a couple $1,000s between website, promotional materials, trying to get space to speak and introduce myself to the local communities. So that was relatively low, but it felt like a lot at the time. And
that feels like a lot.
Yeah, I was going out on this kind of whim where before, all my business came like word of mouth, which I was lucky for, but I'm like, oh crap, I'm going to have to figure out how to invest in myself and get myself out there. So that was very scary. And again, that did seem like a lot of money. With Made Easy, Marcus invested, I think we invested $7,000, I think, when it was all said and done. So we were under $10,000, but it was to get the website up, to get certain advertising markets up or platforms up, some of the resources, some of the education, some of the tools that we needed to make sure that this was successful. And then in the past, the largest expense we've ever had that didn't come out of anything was that as an app we were building like 10 years ago. And app developments, especially back then, were so expensive. You were trying to make sure it was right and ready. I think app development might be slightly cheaper now, but that was close to $10,000. So over the years, I feel like we have invested probably upward $40,000, $50,000 in ideas trying to make something work. But you're right. I think service businesses take a lot less money than like product-based businesses or new, crazy, sexy ideas type of businesses. And so I felt like, okay, this was a moderate investment. I was worried that it wouldn't pay off because we didn't know anything about the cleaning business. But now in hindsight, I encourage people to, if they're looking into entrepreneurship and wanting to kind of start working for themselves and learning about the ins and outs of just business in general, a service-based business is a great place to start. Because there is like no investment, right? Yeah. Service-based is the way to go. There's a handful of businesses or services you can pick from that are already proven. They're tried and true. Cleaning is one of them. Yeah. And there's a lot of things you can mimic or learn or glean from without having to reinvent the wheel. So for what it's worth, that investment was totally worth it considering where we are now. And
Yeah.
I know that even for a lot of people, $7,000 is a lot of money to just say, this is what I'm going to commit to, right? And we are lucky in the sense that we're dinks. We were dual income, no kids, and we relatively lived a pretty simple life. We don't have expensive habits more so than just like eating out or happy hour or whatever.
Yeah, we're not buying like crazy expensive cars. We're not renting or buying places that are, stretching our, means.
Exactly. So we're pretty simple in that aspect. So of course I would say that definitely cut down or reevaluate your expenses and what you're doing when you're making that huge investment. Because again, this is upwards $10,000. And that's just the base price, right? We don't even know how much our time, what the value of our time.
10,000 is just an arbitrary number that I chose.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
Comfortable like investing in, like some people don't feel comfortable investing more like than $1,000, which I get. Like it feels like so much money.
It is a lot. And I would say that for what it's worth, that $10,000 mark or dollar amount that you had, Lauren, even though you consider it arbitrary, it's a really good baseline for service-based businesses. Like just more or less, service-based businesses should not take more than $10,000 to get off the ground. Products are a little different, but it will definitely help you kind of know if you're kind of going towards the right path and if you need to pivot or do anything else differently. So we spent a lot of money over the years. I'm glad that this 10,000th idea worked. But for us, I should say for Marcus, there was just really no other way. He knew that this was going to be his path for as early as 13, I think probably even sooner. So it was just finding the right thing and finding the right support and information and access to information that kind of just helped leverage us in this business. So it's definitely paid off, but also keep in mind, whatever you invest may take a minute to pay off. It may take a year or two. Ideally, you do want to have a stopping point of investing, whether that's a number or time period, whatever that looks like, before you're continuing to lose money and say, maybe I need to kind of back out and reevaluate some other ideas.
Yeah, and that's why I think starting out with a service-based business is such a good way to go if you're new, because you are getting that money back faster than you would at a product-based business, and you can find out if it's working or not. And like you said, it's like, well, if it's not working after by 10 grand, like I'm still sinking in money and I'm not getting the return, like that's possibly a sign that it's just not working out.
Right.
So yeah, and I think it's a really good point that you brought up too, that we are dinks, double income, no kids, and Marcus and Brian have always wanted to be entrepreneurs, and they definitely feel more comfortable and okay with investing like hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars in an idea and it not paying off, because it hasn't paid off for many years, and here we are now where it is starting to actually work. So I think that is also a comfort level and that acceptance that it's kind of like it's a risk.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a risk. And as long as you're okay with taking that risk, I think it'll help you get through the nights where you're kind of reevaluating and guessing, oh my gosh, is this the right thing to do? When you've kind of made that plunge and decided this is the steps you're going to take, you kind of have to live with it. And that money's gone. And you just have to work on getting it back through your business. So
yeah, I thought you brought up another good point earlier that just clicked for me 10 minutes later. It was about living within your means and really looking at your expenses. Because when you go into entrepreneurship, we've talked about how unstable it is, especially with revenue. You have your up and down months. And if you have high expenses, you will feel the stress that much more. Like, I remember Brian and I were like, well, we're cutting HBO Max, like we're cutting Hulu. I was like, oh God, why did I get this house when I had a stable corporate job? Like with this mortgage, I was like, we don't need this. Like, I love it, I want it. But you know, when you have the lower months, you feel that stress, and then, you know, you climb back up and I'm like, oh yeah, we can get HBO back again. Yeah. Like, they're fucking like $15 a month expenses, but that's what it's like when you're, you know, an entrepreneur. You're like, you look at everything and you're like, if I don't need it, it's gone. And so,
yep. Well, I graduated to average bottle of wine being $19.99. Well, now I have to go back to $8.99. And
$2 Chuck, here I come.
I gotta make this sacrifice. You know, I gotta do what I gotta do. So yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. You start looking at everything, what you can go with or without. I definitely think entrepreneurs know a thing or two about trying to live within their means. I unfortunately, I think both of us, we've come across entrepreneurs who are trying to do that whole fake it till you make it thing, and they're like,
yes,
living off of credit or debt and
investors' money.
Yes, their investors' money. I don't recommend that at all. I think there's something more obviously authentic about being an entrepreneur who's kind of grinding it out and doing what it takes to get to the next level. I think there's a respectability about that. And it might look nice that you have this nice shiny car, this big house or penthouse or whatever else, and clothes and all of these things. But yeah, if your business ultimately is not making any money, I mean, you're kind of coming off fraudulent. So I don't think it's worth it.
Yeah. So we're only halfway through what our script
I know.
And I think I think we should save for the next podcast. This is going to be a series, because there's so much that you can talk about with money and finances in relation to entrepreneurship. So this to me feels like a good stopping point for now. But yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to the money, as we talked about before, so it's not surprising that we spent really just the first segment of this talking about our finance lingo and getting through the startup costs. So
yeah. With our next episode, we'll start to talk about more specifics and like, where does our money actually go? Some perceptions, like there's plenty more to cover. But thank you for listening to this one, and I hope you stick around for the next few.
Yeah. I think you'll learn who's better with money, me or Lauren. I'm putting my bets on Lauren.
No comparisons here.
Yeah, you're right. No comparisons, but you'll see. I'm gonna have a few interesting gaffes with our business money and even with our mindset. So stay tuned.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Like, subscribe, share, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn, and all the things. Have a good one.
Thanks, guys.